Hello and welcome to episode 165 of The Pitcher or the Hitter, the podcast by the M-SABR Dynasty League for the M-SABR Dynasty League. I am Cam,
I'm Sahil.
and it is a very special August episode of The Pitcher or the Hitter. I guess it's a special August episode because it is in August. Um, and this is a bit of a different episode. We are just going to kind of skip the recap. We're recording super late because of the draft, because of some scheduled changes. Or not because of the draft, because of the trade deadline, and we're recording directly before the hockey draft. So we're just gonna discuss trades all episode. It'll be a shorter episode, and it's hopefully gonna be a good one.
Yeah, talking trades all episode. You're talking dirty to me over here. But as you did mention, we are on a time crunch, and there are quite a few trades to talk about. So let's dive in here. This first trade was one that for some reason you didn't even know went down. EBO traded its 2025 first round pick and David Fry, who Eric immediately cut, to Eric for Justin Verlander, Max Scherzer, and Eugenio Suarez. Uh, want me to go first on this one since you were
Yeah, why don't you go right
gathering
ahead?
your thoughts here?
Yeah,
Yeah, it was. I didn't hate the logic of it, for EVO where it's like, hey, like I want to go and get a couple of, potential impact starters down the stretch for this playoff run. With them thinking your 2025 first round pick is going to be late. Although there was some risks because like Scherzer or sorry, Verlander was still in the IL. But now Verlander is still on the IL, but Scherzer has also landed back on the IL. So EVO does not really have much to show for it at the moment. I think Verlander's on his way back, so maybe to get healthy and make an impact down the stretch. But I mean, from Eric's perspective, right, he has a lot of starting pitchers. He could afford to give up two 40-year-olds. And as you're seeing, the injuries are showing their head again for them. So seemed like a good gamble for him.
yeah. So this really does feel kind of like Zane's acquiring a couple guys that he likes. Um, the first, it's not gonna hurt him, I guess. This season, the first, I guess it'll be most likely late first. Yeah, Verlander, Scherzer, Suarez are all guys that they have owned in the past. Scherzer's been hurt. Verlander's been hurt. Neither of them have been amazing this year. Suarez has been kind of himself, although he's kind of on a heater, so that's good for EBO to acquire. Um, acquire third baseman. They are kind of hard to come by. I think it's a fine deal. Getting three pieces. None of them I'm like super thrilled by or anything.
Yeah, I think that's fair. No, I think pretty interesting gamble, and I think if the injuries don't hurt Scherzer and Verlander, I think it's going to come out pretty fair, but it's not looking that way at the moment.
Gotcha. I agree. Yeah, so we'll see. And it really just depends on who Eric takes with that pick. He ends up keeping it. Actually, I don't think he has that pick anymore. Um, but yeah, shall we move on to the next one? We can be very quick about. You traded Robert Calaz to Eric for two picks. Uh, yeah, I don't really care about this deal. I think you probably got a pretty good return for Calaz, though.
Yeah, I was a complex guy that Eric happened to like. He was on Eric's watch list, and I kind of beat him to him. The only interesting tidbit to that was I was a runner up in a Scherzer sweepstakes, and the runner up offer was Scherzer for Calaz, and then when or Calaz, I don't know how you pronounce it, but I pivoted afterwards to Eric. I was like, look, would you just give me picks for him? So yeah, that's that trade. I have absolutely nothing else to say on him.
Yeah, he's fine. He's probably worth the second.
Yeah.
Let's move on here. Another, this is a slightly more interesting one. You acquired Zach Eflin for Chase McDermott and Cooper Pratt. Zach Eflin, a new Baltimore Oriole. I know you haven't liked him in the past, but it seems like he's been a guy that you've liked more recently.
No, it's the opposite. I've liked him a lot in the past. This is the fifth time I've owned him. I've always been a fan of his because I love players with low walk rates because I think they get deeper into games and if they get damaged by like home runs or whatnot. you don't have too many runners on base. I've been a huge Eflin fan for a long time. I've intentionally gone out and tried to acquire him a couple of times now. Um, I think he's going to be really good in Baltimore. You get a good defense behind him. Left field walls back there deep. He's on a winning team. I just it, I think last year was kind of his peak, when the strikeout rate was elevated. It was close to a K per nine. This year, the strikeout rate is kind of back down to where it has been in his career, where it's been kind of in the 7 to 8 K per nine range. But uh, I just think for a back end rotation arm, if he's not going to walk a ton of guys and if he's going to be able to get relatively deep into games because he's not walking guys, I think that he's a really strong upgrade over Marcus Stroman, who we'll talk about in a second, and definitely a plus that he is an Oriole. So I'm excited to have him in my rotation. I think from Yuki's perspective, this bumps Chase McDermott, the Eflin move, out of a potential rotation spot in Baltimore. And McDermott just got hurt after the trade, so that part's not looking so hot. But I like Cooper Pratt. I think he's a pretty decent gamble for Yuki. Um, I don't know if maybe he could have gotten more kind of given the year Eflin had last year, but I think that given what Eflin's done so far this year, if he keeps that up, I think this is an appropriate price. But I am gambling a little bit that the move to Baltimore will kind of get him back to where closer to where his ceiling was last year, although I don't think he's going to quite hit it.
Yeah, I think Pratt's fine. He's a decent return. Yuki didn't need to be rostering Eflin. Um, I don't really care about Chase McDermott. He's kind of a high walk rate guy. I'm just basically paraphrasing my comments to you um, in the
In our
in our
chat.
separate chat. I think it's a fine deal for both sides. The Brewers kind of have a decent amount of young infielders. There's kind of a bit of a wave coming of them with Wilkin and with Pratt and with Mike Bove and with what's the name of the guy I just added? I have no
Oh,
idea.
Batoni,
Oh
Eric.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
Eric Batoni. I like him. He's super young as well. So yeah, they've got some guys.
yeah. No, I agree.
Um,
Um,
and yeah, Pratt's one of them.
yeah, I think you're right. So solid trade for both sides. I think Eflin kind of shores up the end of my rotation, and Yuki gets a fun prospect. Um, Also, very quickly, I told Yuki I was going to give him praise for this trade on the podcast, and he was like, "You're probably just going to spend 20 minutes talking about Zach Eflin instead." So he absolutely put me in a body bag there. Genuinely great comeback, but also hot Yuki. We just talked about this trade for maybe 2 minutes, so suck it.
Not a super long time to talk about this trade. Yeah, let's talk about the next one here. I don't know how you were able to trade away Torque. I don't know why EBO wanted Torque, but you have traded away Spencer Torkelson, your NPI guy, for Emerson Hancock and a third.
I have yet to listen to a podcast or read an article that has anything remotely positive to say about Torkelson. I know he's been a little hot recently in AAA, but there's still a lot of worrying signs under the hood. Um, Generally, for an MPI guy, if I could get anything, I'm pretty happy. I don't really care about Hancock. I care about the pick, which I ended up using in a later trade. So it all kind of worked out. And yeah,
Yeah, it's basically a way to get you a third round pick. Hancock's not really the most interesting. He's not having a great season. He was fine last year in double A and in a little bit of time in the majors. We'll see. He's 25 now. We'll see if he kind of develops over the remaining part of this year, next year.
yeah, agreed. And I will say it's funny. This is the second time in the past 2 months that EBO traded a third round pick to go and acquire Spencer Torkelson.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, it is quite something else, but it's the way it goes sometimes. All right, this next CBO trade is a lot more interesting. Actually, do we want to save some of the bigger trades for the end and just kind of knock out some of the quicker trades?
Yeah, let's knock out some of the bigger ones. You made almost all of these trades,
Or
my goodness.
smaller ones, you
So,
mean? Yeah.
Um, yeah, knock out the smaller ones. You traded Brian Hudson, Shea Whitcomb, and a third for Jorge Soler. Soler's interesting as like a yeah back of the lineup guy. Why don't you talk about him?
Yeah, so I acquired Soler right after he got traded to Atlanta. He had a great season last year, 341 OBP, 36 homers, 126 WRC plus. And he signs with the Giants. And first 2 months weren't great, but he was on a heater in June and July, so kind of got the numbers back up to where they've been over the course of his career. Then he gets traded to Atlanta, where he's in a better lineup in a much better ballpark, and the Braves are committed to leading him off every day. So I thought this would kind of be a good opportunity to kind of hop on the train here and see if he can spike a couple of solid months with Atlanta. And I've just been ravaged with offensive injuries. I mean, since we've last talked, I've now also lost Jordan Westberg. And I mean, I think quite a few of these guys are not going to come back this year. So I just desperately needed the depth. I was tired of starting Angel Martinez and Matt Vierling and those types of guys. So I think this raises the floor of my outfield a bit. And I think at the very least, Soler is always is cut down the strikeout rate the last couple of years while maintaining like a walk rate between 10 and 11%. So I think at the very least, like if nothing else, there's some pretty solid plate skills here to work with if he's not able to kind of get the power spike back up quite to the level that he did last year. But I think from Connor's perspective, I think Whitcomb's a solid get. I mean, he's a close to major league ready infielder. I picked him up a couple weeks ago. I liked him, but not really somebody I was anticipating was going to stick on my roster once he lost his prospect eligibility. Brian Hudson was hurt at the time that I traded him. I believe he is still hurt. And I was having a hard time justifying holding on to an injured holds guy. I only did because he was attracting interest. So for someone I was probably going to cut, that's totally fine. And then a third round pick's a third round pick.
Yeah, pretty much. I think Connor maybe could have gotten more in terms of quality. He got some good pieces. Um, yeah, Hudson, yeah, like you said, is hurt, although he's prospect eligible, I believe, still, and
He's not.
I just kind of he's not anymore, but he's putting him on the IL. Maybe he kind of takes over. Um, maybe he's kind of like a closer. Get some saves down the stretch and can flip him for something. But I don't think he's like a high upside guy or any sort of keeper. Whitcomb's fine. I don't really care about Whitcomb. Um, maybe with Loperfido gone, he's got some more of a track for playing time. He's hitting well in AAA, but I don't think he's someone to get super excited about. Um, yeah, I think it'd be nice if Connor got someone a little bit better for Soler. Not that Soler's exciting or anything either, except for some homers.
Absolutely. I will say one more thing on Soler. It's going to be kind of interesting. He exclusively DH for the Giants. The Braves already have Marcell Ozuna, so Soler's been playing the outfield. I'm curious to see how that positively or negatively affects his production, but it does make it more interesting for next year because he won't lose outfield eligibility, barring like him getting injured this week and just not playing the outfield. So. Um, just another kind of interesting tidbit on him there. Anything else, or you want to move on to the next one?
No, let's move on. You traded away Marcus Stroman the first, or yeah, on the 2nd of August. You were kind of running. You needed to trade him. You had kind of an extra pitcher, and you found a fun way to make it a unique condition in that deal.
Yeah, so this one was kind of fun. Zane at the end of one of our like college football 25 calls like kind of mentioned that he might want to trade Cronenworth. And I was like, like I think I might trade a second round pick for him and we are talking about how that might be fair. So then the next day, I've been kind of desperately trying to trade Stroman. He hasn't been good recently. EBO's cut him, and I was like, finally, it's like, look, like give me even like a 0.00001% chance of like getting Stroman, like getting something for Stroman. And Zane was like, yeah, I'll do that, but then we also have to do the Cronenworth for a second to open up a prospect slot. This all happened like 20 minutes before the first game started. I was like, fuck it, let's do it. And then Stroman proceeds to like give up like I think 7 earned in 2 2/3 innings, something like that. So actually might have cost EBO the win last week, just given how close ERA and WHIP were. Um, but so that's kind of interesting. But yeah, I think Cronenworth he hasn't been as good in June and July as he was in April and May, but the underlying metrics look like a lot better than they did the prior 2 years when he was struggling. He is a bit of a volume play. He's like in the top 30 in RBIs this year. And I was comparing the stats. He's basically a very slightly better version of Ryan Mountcastle. And I was like, well, I'd pay a second round pick for Ryan Mountcastle, so I figured I might as well do it for Cronenworth. And with some of the infield injuries I've had, the Westberg, the Albies injuries, and um, there's somebody else. I too many guys are getting hurt. I just needed that infield depth, so was very happy to acquire him for cheap.
Yeah, Cronenworth's been a pretty decent bounce back guy this year. It wouldn't necessarily surprise me if he struggled down the stretch and was someone that you cut. I don't expect him to be on your team next, regardless. But I think he's, a fine guy to gamble on down, down the stretch. And yeah, you gave up a second in the deal, which kind of feels right since you were really trying to get rid of Stroman.
Yeah, I will say I think that the theme of the trade deadline for me, I feel like I'm usually making like at least one big blockbuster move. I didn't this year. It was a lot of depth moves. And I think it was just, you know what? I have a good team, but a lot of it's hurt. Let me patch up some holes. So, either some of these guys are going to come back right before our fantasy playoffs and will be able to contribute, or if not, these depth guys can continue to fill in. I won't exactly be hurt if like Soler or Cronenworth aren't on my roster. Come playoff time, I'd obviously like to hang on to them, and I do think they have value for next season. But these are, I think, relatively expendable pieces, kind of in the bigger scheme of things. If I absolutely push comes to shove and I have to cut someone.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Um, but yeah, so that's that deal. Yeah, the next few are big. Let's talk about
Or no, no,
on
no,
home.
no. There's some smaller ones. Let's knock out the bullpen trades quick.
Okay, you want to include Rysel as one of the smaller ones?
You know what? Let's
We've mentioned it by name. Let's talk about it. You
yeah.
sent Yoelin Cespedes and a third for Rysel Iglesias and Heral Perez.
Yeah, so Jake and I kind of talked about this concept uh, a couple months ago, but he wanted a couple of prospects. I wasn't willing to do that. Iglesias' K rate had plummeted earlier in the year. It was like a 6K per nine. That number's up to like eight something now. He's really, I think, improved. And I say improved into K numbers because he's been solid getting saves and having a consistently low ERA all year. Um, the Braves have kind of rebounded a bit. They're tightening things up with the Phillies, and I think he's kind of a good second closer to pair with Josh Hader. I know I said I was going to really just go heavy on holds this year, but circumstances kind of changed. So I think Cespedes is a decent prospect, but he is in complex ball. I've seen some varying kind of opinions on what he's actually how he's going to develop. I think he was kind of a throw in at the end there because Jake was going to cut him. I think he has a bit of upside, so I don't mind taking him on. And I think Iglesias is kind of a good guy to have in the bullpen for the rest of this year, and then we'll kind of see after that. And either he's a bridge to me getting Felix Bautista back next year, or maybe I add Felix Bautista to this Hader Iglesias uh, and possibly Estevez kind of closers group.
Yeah, I feel like you got a really good deal for Iglesias. I think he's good, and I think a lot of teams would have traded for Iglesias if they knew that Cespedes was the price. Although I guess Jake likes these 18-year-old complex ball guys, Cespedes being a Red Sox, um, probably makes Jake kind of value him a little bit higher than other teams do. And the numbers do look good, but he's a complex ball guy. Um, he he's got upside. I'm not sure that he's maybe. I think maybe he could have gotten another pick or prospect or something, but it's yeah, not the worst.
Yeah, I think it's decent enough value. But and I'm guessing he probably internally ranks Cespedes a little higher than you and I might be kind of referring to him as. So I think from his
Right.
perspective, he's fine with it. But um, anything else there? If not, I want to talk about the other reliever trade I made.
Yeah, let's talk about this one. You got a lot of flack for this.
I traded Angel Martinez to Yuki for Carlos Estevez. So I think Angel Martinez has a very good hit tool and very good plate discipline. And those are skills I like in a hitter because that's solid foundation. It's a solid foundation to which you can kind of, maybe start to develop some of these other skills. You can grow into power. You can't really grow into good plate skills. It's very hard to change. Um, that being said, he doesn't have sexy power or speed numbers, but he's quad eligible. I think he's a decent guy that Yuki could maybe roster like as a kind of a bench bat that fills in everywhere, or kind of like a fifth outfield type. I don't think he has like the highest upside or anything, but Cleveland has trusted him to bat second for a good chunk of the season, so it's clear that they like him, and he's only 22. Estevez, right, 31 years old. Got traded from the Angels to the Phillies. I think he's gonna get the majority of the save opportunities for the Phillies down the stretch, but unlike with the Angels, he's not like the clear-cut closer. They definitely have other options. Um, and Yuki's not competing this year, right? So I don't get why everybody's up in arms that he gave up a 31-year-old reliever who might not even close next year for a team and might not even be the closer right now in Philly to get like a decent 22-year-old. So I didn't really understand why I got all the flack. You made basically the same move for Jeff Hoffman, but gave up somebody arguably worse. Um, uh, and nobody thought twice about it. But when I make this type of move, everybody's up in arms, which is fine. But it's just how it
I
goes.
think the difference between these two moves, Nelson Rada's young and has potential to grow into something else. Angel Martinez, he's about to reach his plate appearance at bat limit. So Yuki's going to have to make a decision right away on whether he's going to be part of his future team or not, and whether he's going to last the offseason on this roster. So I think that's probably part of it. Yeah, I get trading Carlos Estevez, but um, I don't really think of Angel Martinez as like a long-term above replacement level as far as this league goes guy.
Yeah, that's certainly fair. And but you know what? Maybe Yuki sees something in him and is like, if he could develop into like a 15 homer, 15 stolen base guy, and if he can keep up the good plate discipline, and if they play him in a couple of different positions, like that has utility. So, and I think that's within the range of outcomes.
I guess that's fair. Um, let's move on to the final of the smaller ones. Andrew traded Brady House to Alex and Zach for Ezekiel Tovar. This is one that Andrew was kind of talking through with us on the call. Alex wasn't there, but there was kind of some discussion around this, and eventually he pulled the trigger.
Yeah, I, I think from Andrew's perspective, right, like Tovar is going to play every day in Colorado. He's young. I do have a lot of questions about the plate skills. I mean, he has an awful walk rate of 3.0 and a 28% K rate. Um, but like he has a career high in home runs already. He's got 18 with 4 stolen bases. Like he's probably going to hit like 25 homers and steal like 8 bases. and have it with a 300 OBP at the age of 22. There is utility to that. I just don't know if like that's somebody I really want to like stake a claim in long term as like a big part of my core, but for Andrew, he's like his second shortstop behind Bobby Witt. So I think, and I think for the price that he acquired him, I think if he can use him as like a decent MI or util option, like I think that's solid. I think Brady House is like a decent prospect. I think the Nationals will probably end up playing him at third base, which to Alex, what he expressed to me was that was part of the appeal. He's got a lot of middle infield prospects, but he wanted some more corner infield prospects. Um, and I think Brady House is a higher floor type of profile. Obviously, he hasn't debuted in the majors, so um, we're not going to know what his floor is in the majors until he gets there. But I feel better about his skill set than I do Tovar's over the long haul.
That's fair. Tovar's got the prospect pedigree. He was very recently a top 50 prospect. He's kind of having his best season. He's having a better season than last year, at least. Even though the walk rate is down. I think, yeah, he's got utility, and him being in cores will certainly help him out. He's already got 18 homers. I think, there are worse guys to be rostering for sure. Um, and yeah, House has kind of seen his stock fall over the last year or so. Um, he's fine. I'm not, and I think we've talked about it on the podcast. I'm not in love with Brady House. And I think it's fine to trade him for a guy like this.
I guess looking at House's numbers right now, I'm a little less impressed than I was before. Yeah, yeah, I don't know. He's still 21 and he's 21 in AAA right now, so you taking some of those numbers with a grain of salt, but perhaps maybe like you like to see a bit more from him than maybe what he's done in the minors. But it seems like there's a fair amount of analysts and whoever else who kind of seem pretty high on him. So we'll see. I think that'll be one of the more interesting trades to kind of track as we continue to go here.
All right, let's move on here. There are three big trades left. Let's just kind of go through them here. Which was the first of them, chronologically?
Yeah, I am pulling this back up, as I am reading or as I'm getting all these hockey chats. All right, the first one was EBO has agreed to send Bryce Terang, Cody Bellinger, Brian Wu, Bear 2025 second, Andrews 2026 second, and EBO's 2027 second to Connor for Luis Robert Jr. and Salvador Perez. Cam, why don't you go first this time?
Yeah, so this was definitely the biggest deal of the deadline. It happened about 6 days or 5 days before the deadline, but I think it was the biggest one of them. Public sentiment seemed to be saying that EBO um, overpaid here. I guess my thought is either he's having a worse season than I thought he was, or Bryce Rank I thought he was, because it feels tough to, find Luis Robert types around.
That it is.
Um, yeah, I don't really, and I guess, yeah, upon looking further, yeah, Robert has had a pretty lousy season. His strikeout rate is way up to 35.7%. So I kind of get it. And I'm maybe not the biggest Bryce Terang fan um in the world. He does steal some bases. He steals a lot of bases, but he's never going to be a guy who, you know, gets on at a 350 clip or hits for any power. Um, but it is still a decent amount to give up. Brian Wu is, one of the better young pitchers. Um, Cody Bellinger is someone that they were adamant that they were never going to trade. So it's really banking on a Luis Robert bounce back, and he is a couple years older than I thought he was. I thought he was still 25, but he's 27. So maybe this is, not the best deal for EBO, and the consensus was right.
Yeah, I gave EBO a lot of praise for the Brian Reynolds deal. I'm gonna say the opposite here. I don't like this deal for them. I've never been the biggest Luis Robert fan. And like, look, they're banking on the upside here. Last season, 2023, he had a 38 home runs, 20 stolen bases, and a 315 OBP in 145 games. Like that's elite. Um, it came with a 29% K rate and a 5% walk rate. I'm not a big fan of that. And that is the only season in which he's played more than 98 games in the majors and put up those type of numbers. I'm just and this year it's gotten markedly worse. I mean, I'm just skeptical that he's going to be able to keep this up at a level where he can consistently get back to his 2023 performance. Um, and to gamble on that, right? And I get it. They also got Sal Perez back. He's hitting very well. I'm not going to discount what like a top five catcher is doing, but I'm also concerned like at some point the wheels have to fall off here. I think he's a really solid get for this year, maybe next, but I'm not counting on him necessarily as like a long-term asset for EBO. So despite the good year he's having, he's not weighing as heavily for me long term, but I do think like it's a significant upgrade for them in the short term. Um, but then like you're looking at what they gave up. Like I know Brian Wu has kind of had dealt with some injuries this year. Maybe the K rate's not as high as you'd like it to be, but I still think he's an incredibly talented young pitcher. And I wouldn't be surprised if when it's all said and done, he's the most valuable piece in this deal. I've been kind of low on Cody Bellinger in the past, and it actually came out today that he's still dealing with the effects of the broken finger. But I still trust him. I think he has a higher floor than Robert, and he's certainly shown the ceiling. Um, so like, do I think he's ever going to be an outfield one again? Probably not, but I think he can be a nice like outfield three option. Um, and then what was the other piece? I mean, I think Bryce Turang, I'm not his biggest fan. He had a lot of stolen bases early on in the season. Like he's not getting on base as much now, but like he's basically just kind of another Nico Horner, and I think that there's some utility to that. And then obviously the 3 second round picks, those aren't uh that's nothing to slouch. That they're valuable picks. So I just think EBO paid up way too much of a price to go and gamble on someone who has not been particularly good this year. And they have the depth to take that risk, but also man, I don't know. I'm just not a fan of Robert. And I think they could have taken a gamble on somebody else. Like, I don't know. But we'll see how this one plays out. I do think Connor did good to, the more assets he can get, the better at this point. It's not going to be a short rebuild. It's still jarring seeing him trade White Sox players. Um, but hey, good for him.
Yeah, no, good for Connor, I guess. Yeah, selling a White Sox player. I mean, this is the year to do it. Um, it's, you know, got to be hard to give up on a guy like that, especially considering the season he had last year. But it has been pretty dire for Robert this year. And yeah, the walk rate is the highest it's been since his rookie year. But he got a pretty good return. He's not going to need um Perez certainly in the long term. So um I get it. I like it for Connor. He's got some interesting young pieces back. And hopefully this helps his rebuild.
Absolutely. Also, one thing I'd like to add to just a fun tidbit. That trade was made almost um 5 years to the day of the last Cody Bellinger for Luis Robert deal. Luis Robert has been dealt twice. Both times it was for Cody Bellinger. That one was Luis Robert, Jesus Luzardo, David Fletcher, Carlos Rodon, and Austin Riley for Cody Bellinger, Mitch Keller, Jesus Sanchez and Dansby Swanson. So I mean, kind of crazy the types of deals these two players have been involved in. But yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, Bellinger and Robert yeah, involved in one of the biggest deals in league history, and maybe this will be one that we down the line consider to be one of the biggest deals in league history.
I sure hope so. All right, let's talk about the next biggest trade. Um, I really like this one for both sides. This was Eric trading Noelvi Marte and Ruthvik's 2025 first to Ruthvik for Anthony Santander and Davison De Los Santos. Cam, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think yeah, that is an interesting one from both sides. De Los Santos is a guy I discussed at the deadline. Is kind of a bit of a throw-in. He's kind of been up and down throughout his I guess throughout his last few years as a prospect. He's up currently. Um, Santander, I think you'd have to kind of give me the scouting report. I'll give the scouting report on Marte. He had the steroid suspension. He came back cold. I'm not sure where his defensive home is going to be because he's really struggling. He struggled at shortstop. He's been a little bit better at third. I don't think he's a very good fielder. So maybe he gets pushed to the outfield, maybe he gets pushed to first base. Regardless, though he's struggled at the plate, I think I'm not, super worried about his ability to bounce back. Um and kind of, be be able to hit. He had a few hard hit balls in last night's game. So that said, yeah, Eric also gave up a first in this deal. Um, I guess it really depends on your read on Santander. He is having a good season. Maybe he's a future Red. I think it feels like a pretty solid deal for Eric if you think Santander is going to continue to hit like this, and he certainly has the last couple of years.
Yeah, so what I will say about first off, I think this is a really fair trade for both sides that I like a lot. I think from Ruthvik's perspective, he's selling on a player who is having a career year and really a career 2 months. And an interesting high upside prospect, but one that's a bit expendable to get his first round pick back, which is going to be a lottery pick. And Olevi Marte, which I mean, you gave the scouting report on. I mean, I still think he is a very recent top prospect who is probably at his lowest value. And Ruthvik needs third base help. He's traded away Bregman and Devers over the last year. His rotation of third baseman is weak, to put it nicely. Looking at the Cabrian Hayes and got it. Michael Garcia, like hasn't been great. I guess Arenado's okay, but um with respect to Santander, here's my only concern. He was ice cold in April and May, and then he's hit like 20 some home runs between June, July, and actually he has 2 home runs already today. He's been streaky throughout his career. It would not surprise me if like he goes cold for like the next month and his end of season numbers are still gonna look really great, but like Eric's gonna be a little disappointed. Um and so I think there's some risk of that, but I'm not super worried about it. Like that wouldn't have deterred me from making this trade if I was Eric. But yeah, I mean, I think it's an ultimate win-win deal. Contender gets a good win now piece. Well, I also think it contribute in the future, and then vice versa. Ruthvik gets kind of a good rebuilder's haul. So, yeah,
Yeah, I think that's certainly fair, decent, haul for both sides. And yeah, Ruthvik can wait on Marte more than Eric can.
absolutely. Anything else you'd like to say here, or ready to move on to the last deal?
Yeah, and the last one was one of mine. I traded Yusei Kikuchi and Joey Loperfido to Ruthvik for Seth Lugo.
Yeah, I'll let you talk about this one. Go for it.
Yeah, so I really struggled to kind of figure out what I should do at the deadline. I feel like my roster is kind of full, and especially because I'm getting a lot of starting pitchers back. My hitting's been great for the last month or so, and my pitching has been really dreadful for the last month or so. So I guess really the only type of move I could make is trading a pitcher for a better pitcher, is what I decided. And I kind of looked at a few people. We discussed Max Fried very briefly. Um, and then I kind of reached out to Ruthvik about Lugo. He told me he doesn't like most of my players, but he does like Loperfido. Um, I considered Loperfido pretty expendable, even after his move to Toronto. He's a guy who's going to be expiring his prospect eligibility very, very soon. And I'm not going to have a spot for him. Um, and as interesting of a guy he is, he hasn't been like, begging, yeah, breaking down the door, begging me to put him on the major league roster like someone like James Wood has, for example. So, or Jackson Merrill did earlier in the year. So Perfito I consider expendable. Yusei Kikuchi has been really lousy for the last 2 months or so. And Seth Lugo, his first start with my team was kind of rough, but I'm excited about him. I streamed him 5 times as a reliever in 2022. So I think he could be a good starter down the stretch for me, lower my ERA, which is really what I need to do if I want to compete for one of the top spots is just not be putting up a 4 ERA week in and week out. And I'm hoping that Lugo will help with that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think you didn't give up a ton to get a marginal upgrade in the rotation. Um, eh, Lugo's now kept it up long enough where I don't think it's going to be like, oh, there's some inevitable regression coming. But I also do think there's a real chance that Kikuchi really steps it up in Houston. It wouldn't totally surprise me just the way Kikuchi can kind of go on tears here that like Kikuchi puts up similar, if not better numbers than Lugo the rest of the way, especially considering that Kikuchi will do it with more strikeouts. But I I do think this is a really good gamble for you. I think you gave up a ton to do that. And I do think from Ruthvik's perspective, right, Loperfido's now with Toronto. He could easily get some full-time playing time. And if that happens, maybe he kind of develops into an interesting piece that Ruthvik could kind of use in his outfield or I think they were also trying him out at first base in Houston before he got traded. I'm assuming they're not going to do it on Toronto, but um, I like this move for both sides here. And I'm glad Ruthvik was able to capitalize on Lugo. Maybe I wish he was able to do it for more of a kind of a prospect or young player based return than like having Kikuchi attached to the trade. But I think considering what was out there in the market, I think he did a really nice job in correctly identifying that Lugo's having a career year he should sell.
Yeah, no, fair enough. If you had to guess, do you know where Pitcher List has Seth Lugo ranked?
I I I, I saw it today. I think it was like 15th.
Yeah, he's 27th, but still ahead of guys like Sonny Gray, Justin Steele, Logan Webb, Zach Gallen. He's ahead of both of them. Um, so I'm, you know, as optimistic as that does feel like, I'll certainly take his word for it.
No, absolutely. And I think, he's consistently pitching deep into ball games, which is something you can't say about a lot of these other pitchers. And I think that that certainly helps raise his value.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if it's an upgrade for me this year, then I'll take it. That's what I need.
No, absolutely. So one more fun fact that is related to that trade. We did lose our final yellow square this week. Anthony, for the 2019 draft, Anthony finally cut Alec Thomas. All that was remaining there for a couple of days was your green square on Yusei Kikuchi. But now that you have traded Kikuchi, that is a completely white board.
That is crazy. Yeah, that was the draft where we really didn't know what we were doing. Trading Bo Burrows for a first rounder and drafting other Mesa because we didn't know any of the players. We really have come a long way in our 7 years.
We absolutely have. I will say we did markedly better in the 2020 draft. So the remaining yellow squares are Alek Manoah, Jason Dominguez, Bryson Stott, Corbin Carroll, and George Kirby. But the 2021 draft, I think, will be the next to be whited out. The only remaining yellow squares are Austin Martin, Reed Detmers, and Justin Foscue, with Hassan Kim also on there as a green square. So um, we'll see what happens, but I
We'll
would.
see. Yeah, that was the draft, the COVID draft. I took myself almost entirely out of that draft because I didn't trust any scouting on these players, and I think that was the right call in hindsight.
Yeah, I'm looking back at the players that I took, and I was able to trade some of these for like decent returns, but uh I guess my top two picks have made it to the majors. It's PCA and Austin Wells, but the rest of them kind of flamed out. But hey, Jordan Westberg was in that draft. He went 32nd overall to Alex and Zach. Heston Kjerstad was in that draft. Jake took him 10th overall. Hassan Kim, Max Meyer. I mean, Torkelson sucks, but he was in that draft. Tyler Soderstrom's made it to the majors. Mason Wynn. Honestly, the third round of the draft might be the best round when it's all said and done. But man, not a good
Yeah, I
draft.
mean that. Yeah, really doesn't surprise me at all.
Oh no, you know what? Garrett Crochet won in the second round. So he's probably that alone might make that the best round.
And we were thinking that he might get reached on by Connor earlier, and it turns out it may not have been a reach after all.
I was so prepared to take him with the next pick, but then EBO sniped me. I certainly would have cut him before he had this breakout season, but man, what could have been? Although Austin Wells was a nice trade chip that I cashed in, so a couple of times, so I'll take it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And uh yeah, I had definitely wanted no part of of that draft, and I yeah, traded multiple first rounders out. But you know, um maybe I'd have Heston Kjerstad now. We'll see.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, so we are not going to dive into last week's matchups, but Cam very nicely put together his matchup MVPs from those matchups. So, why don't you take it away there?
Yeah, certainly. So for my 11-1 win over Daniel and Matt, I chose Vlad Jr. He had a really great week. Um, for uh for Connor's upset 6-4-2 win over Jake, I don't think I knew that Connor pulled that one out. Because I was following some of the other matchups. For Connor's win, I selected Jake Berger. For Anthony's 8-4 win over Yuki, I selected Jazz Chisholm. For Andrew's very exciting upset 7-4 win over EBO, we selected Bobby Witt Jr. For Eric's tight 6-5-1 win over Ruthvik, that really came down to the wire, we selected Jose Ramirez. And for your 7-4 win over Alex and Zach, we selected Josh Naylor.
Yeah, good stuff. All good picks. Yeah.
All right. Well, anything else we want to talk about this week about this trade deadline? I know we didn't really dive into the matchups, but there was still a busy week in the league for sure.
No, nothing else.
Yeah, till then, due to the power of editing, the hockey draft has ended. Congrats to all of us, and looking forward to another big hockey season.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, best of luck this hockey season. You are going down, and we will talk soon.
this podcast is good.